before we talk about like how to enter an order block, the first thing you need to know is what is an order block, why they form, and how you can use them to your advantage. So, the first thing about an order block, what is it, right? So, an order block is simply where we will take liquidity, either a high or a low, and we'll be left with a singular candle that takes out the liquidity. In this case, it would be this candle right here as our order block, or quote unquote, order block. So basically what you're looking for is you're looking for one singular candle that takes out a low or a high, followed by the next candle to fully engulf it or be the opposite candle. And what that means is that you're looking for the next candle to completely overshadow what you believe to be an order block. So in this case, this London low is swept. You may be thinking, Plyo, is this our order block? Technically, yes, and also technically, no. This candle here, you'd be looking for it to be engulfed. However, we get a second candle that gets like a double sweep on this low. Then we get the bullish candle. Okay. But why does it work is the question. Like, why do we just immediately fly? Why do we just tap an order block and go? Like, why is that the case? It's because this right here, the move down to either sweep out the high or the low, is a stop run, right? So whoever is confidently holding along from London all the way into New York session, when we like peaked way up here at 10 o'clock, they're thinking that they're good for the entire day and that they'll never get stopped out. So by stopping them out, right, we come back for their entry, and then we immediately turn back around because whoever just got stopped out, or whoever is trying to hold out their long, they still got stopped, and then we immediately pump the opposite direction, which means they were technically still right, but they're no longer able to profit off the trade, which is why that's where the block portion of the name comes in. Order block. We're blocking the orders from going back below where we took liquidity, because there's no reason for us to come down. There's no more liquidity left in this area, which means we have to go seek other liquidity to the opposite direction, meaning whoever caught this short now has to be stopped out because we create an order block, which will block the orders from going beneath it because we need to stop out the opposite direction. So this is kind of a poor example for an actual entry, but it does start to open up discussion for an order block. So let's talk about a real example, a decent example from today. I believe we had one right off open. Yep. 9:30 here. So let's talk about this. So if I go back to replay, you can see we had a 5-minute bullish gap. We have a dealing range, something like this, right? If you look at what happens here, we hit 50%, and then we start pushing back in the opposite direction. Now, I know I said you need to form an order block when there's a high or a low, but there are other spots where order blocks can form, and that's in discount, higher time frame fair value gap, or off of another order block. So just keep that in mind. I'm actually going to write that down because that's important. A premium of a range, meaning, we hit premium and retrace the discount, or we hit discount and retrace the premium for an order block. So that's where you want to look. So keep this in mind. Also, the last one, off of another order block is where you can expect another one to form. So I'm not going to get into all the names of the order blocks because that would be useless. All you need to know is that order blocks form, and just to call it an order block. You do not need to know all of the names, but we can go over them right now. So just to make you guys familiar with the names of all the OBs. OB names, these are all of them. There are 5. There's a standard order block. There's a propulsion block. There's a mitigation block. There's a rejection block. And a breaker block. So these are the 5 blocks. These are the only 5 blocks, actually. If you hear anyone say anything else other than these 5, they're simply wrong. There is no other block. There's only these 5. But you do not need to know this for right now. This is just the intro. This is just to get you familiar with spotting them and how to trade them. So these are the 5, but I'm only going to talk about just the order block itself. That's all you need to remember here. So remember, order blocks form off a high or low inside a fair value gap on a higher time frame one, or just whatever time frame you're looking at, in premium and discount, and off of another order block. Now I know that can be confusing, but in this case, remember we have premium discount. We started in premium, we come down to discount. We're inside of a higher time frame fair value gap, which is the 5-minute, and we hit discount. For us to trigger a bounce, we have to get the stop run, and that's what these bearish set of candles are, right? A stop run is essentially an order block. So this one candle here is the last spot where it's our last bearish candle, and then we start getting a bullish one. This one right here overlaps this bearish candle, which means we have an order block. And so now you may be wondering, well, if we have an order block, what can I do with that information? How do I actually use that? So when we create the order block, once again, where your entry should be is at the open of the candle, of the bearish candle. In this case, it's a bullish order block. So you would be looking to take an entry at the open of the candle. This should be the most sensitive area to price, where the body should not really close through the open of the candle, because this is a bearish candle. The open is at the top. It closes down here because it's a bearish candle. You would want to enter after we close above to get the order block. That's confirmation that's validated. This right here is your entry, either on the order block or in the middle of the order block. Now I'm not going to talk about that just yet, because it's important that you understand that the standard entry for an order block is just simply on the body itself, and the body should be respected, and we should relatively stay above the order block, because it's blocking the orders from going any lower than this, because we've already taken liquidity. In this case, the stop run was enough to stop out most of the people who capitalized off this long. We do not need to come all the way back down here, because we've hit discount and we've hit that 5-minute gap, right? So we get our OB here. It should be respected. Now, what else does it say? It says off of another OB is where we can expect an order block. So what do we see? We get this order block. This is our true OB. It's validated after we engulf it, right? So you wouldn't call this just an order block just because we have a bearish candle. You don't know if it's going to be the last bearish candle. But as soon as we engulf it, we close back above it, it becomes our order block, or a potential order block. And what you would expect to see, even if you do not enter on this black line, which would be your entry, even if you don't enter there, what you would want to see is us relatively respect the open of the candle. And if you see that, what either happens is we immediately fly, or we'll print another doji, which was our second order block. This right here, this candle here, is a propulsion block. Now, once again, I'm not going to get into like what a propulsion block does, all that kind of stuff. Just keep it simple. This is an order block. This is another order block. It's technically a propulsion block, but just for simplicity, we're going to call this an order block. This is an OB. This is an OB, right? And we continue to move higher. Now, if this is our order block, that means that we really shouldn't dip too much down below this candle itself, basically the low, right? So what does that mean? It means that we're trying to reach for higher, which means you almost already have a draw on liquidity just from an order block being created. That's how you can use it to your advantage. Because if we create an order block, everything else will come after it. And that's extremely important as well. So after an OB is formed, so after an order block is formed, what happens after? We either get another OB, which is a propulsion block, or we get a fair value gap or an inverse fair value gap, or we take liquidity. These are the three things that happen after an order block is formed. So in this case, we get the order block, we create another order block, we have a bearish fair value gap here, which could potentially get inversed. And then if we were to displace through this inverse, we would then get a fair value gap. So essentially an order block's job is to, one, get us to liquidity, but what we should also see is either an inverse or a fair value gap be created off of the order block. That's how you can confirm if it's a true order block. So even if you're not comfortable entering the order block here in live time, because it does happen a bit fast, say you're not comfortable entering on the open, what you can do is you can wait until we inverse this gap to say, okay, hey, that's an order block. That's an order block now. I trust it now. I believe that's an order block, which means every trade you take in between this, your stop should either be beneath the order block or at the order block, because you're not expecting price to come back down and retest it. So let's see what happens here. We have our OB down here, a propulsion block. We have a bearish fair value gap. We have liquidity above. It looks like we've got the inverse. We create another propulsion block because you can have more than one propulsion block. And so we tap back into this inverse with the propulsion block, and then we take liquidity. Simple. Right? And one thing we don't have here is a fair value gap. We have the inverse, but no fair value gap. But that's another lesson. I'm just here to talk about order blocks. So let's talk about how you could have actually entered this. For one, you could have entered down here. Me personally, in live time, yes, I took this trade. I entered off this OB and held until we hit this high. But another way you could have entered this was off of the propulsion block after we get the inverse. So in live time, you'd be expecting this high to hit. We did hit this high after we hit the inverse, but if you look closely, this propulsion block ends up holding. Basically, just the OB ends up holding once again. And why is this an OB? It's because it formed after we tapped into another OB, right? Right down here. We get an OB here, another OB off that OB, another OB off of this one, and then we get the inverse. This one gets respected again, so you can trust it. All right. Now let's see if we can find a bearish example, because that's just one bullish example. So let's talk about a bearish OB, because a bullish one is one thing, a bearish one is another. A bearish one is different. So a bearish OB, in my opinion, should only be taken if you get a fair value gap with it, because bearish OBs are low probability. Let me put that in big letters. All bearish OBs are low probability, and I'm sure you've never heard anybody say that. The reason why all bearish OBs are low probability is because year after year, what does NASDAQ do? Let's go on the daily chart and let's see. Year after year, what does NASDAQ do? It only goes up. And if we're only going up on the higher time frame, why would your bearish 1 minute OB hold for more than just a few minutes or hours? It's going to eventually break, and the only thing that we'll be left with is a bullish OB at the bottom somewhere anyways, which is why all bearish OBs are low probability, because the market is designed to only go up and up and up and up and up and up. until we eventually get in a bearish market. That's when they become high probability or just not low probability. And for that, you would need, of course, the daily to be bearish. We'll talk about that in a different time or video, but just for now, just keep this in your notes. Remember this: all bearish OBs are low probability, or they're lower probability than a bullish one. So we're looking at a bearish order block example. So for an OB, there's a couple things you can do. I know I said it could be one candle, but you can group multiple candles together to create an order block because it's going to be a higher time frame order block. And what I mean by that is, for example, we have this high. Remember, when do OBs form? I removed it by accident. But remember, order blocks form either when we take a high or a low, or we're in premium to discount, or off of another OB, or higher time frame fair value gaps, right? So we take out a high, we should get a bearish order block if we're looking to be bearish, right? We take out a high, no displacement above it. We want to see a bearish OB, but we don't know what to look for, right? Well, me personally, I'd be looking for us to close beneath this bullish candle here. Why is that? It's because this run up was the swift 2 candle move up, and then we hit the high. Any move down that we get, we cannot just say that this is a bearish OB. This bullish candle being closed through is not a bearish order block, because like I said, you can group them together because on a higher time frame, it's going to be one singular candle like this. This is our OB, because this is the one that actually, it didn't hit liquidity, but it got extremely close. It's one solid candle. This is kind of a bad example, but I would call this our bearish OB. And once again, it's still low probability because all bearish OBs are low probability, but in this case, this would be a bearish order block. This set of 2 candles right here would be our bearish order block. And you can see we close through it, we tap into it, we dump. What comes after that? A fair value gap. That's how we know the OB is real, because every single order block will give you a fair value gap. This right here is also technically an OB. Why is this bullish one an OB? Because if you remember, they form off of another OB. This bearish OB got validated on this candle. We tap into it by tapping into this OB right here, this bullish candle, tapped into this bearish OB, giving us another OB. So that means this right here is also an OB because it's attached to another one, giving us a bearish propulsion block, which we then speed up, get a fair value gap. That fair value gap is used once again, another bearish OB. So Steve asked, do you consider daily bearish OBs low probability also? No, I do not, because the higher the time frame, the stronger the PD array, right? So if we get a daily bearish OB, what does that mean? It means that we are technically in a bearish market. All of the lower time frames beneath us should therefore be in a bearish market because we've had a bearish change in the state of delivery to the downside. That's when the bearish OBs on the lower time frame become relevant, because we're in a bearish market then, or a short-term bearish market, until we of course bounce out of discount and get another bullish OB. The reason why they're all low probability is because all we do on the daily is just eventually keep running up. So like, for example, when we had that major push down those couple of days, if you look back on that price action, you would see nothing but lower time frame bearish order blocks being respected nonstop, because we were technically in a bearish market. But since we are just right now in a bullish market, technically still, you shouldn't really put too much weight on a bearish OB unless it's for, just a scalp, or, like, you wouldn't expect it to hold the entire day is what I'm trying to say, unless it's a trend day down, which would technically still be a bearish market. So like if the 1 hour or the daily printed a bearish OB, then you could use bearish OBs. You can still use them. It's just that know that they are low probability compared to a bullish one. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use them at all. I'm not saying that you shouldn't even consider them. What I'm saying is that they're just simply lower probability than bullish order blocks. And that's, once again, that's something that I've never heard anyone speak on. That's actually my own personal observation and conclusion from order blocks. It's why I hardly even take bearish OBs, because they just fail all the time, left and right, and they're not nearly as strong as bullish ones. So yesterday I was saying how all bearish order blocks are low probability, but just because they're low probability does not mean you shouldn't take them. You should take them if you see a good setup, but it becomes higher probability when there's a bearish gap or an inverse attached to the bearish OB. So in this case, we have a bearish OB right here, the CISD technically right here, right? But we'll just focus on this one for now. This is our bearish OB. You can see it works. The reason why bearish OBs are low probability is because when we come back to them, they tend to fail. And yes, we did hold this one for quite some time, but when we come back, we usually end up being in liquidity taking mode to take out the high that's associated with the bearish OB, which is why it's low probability. When we have bullish OBs, they end up lasting much, much longer, even if we come back to them. As you can see, this bullish one here, we went up, we come back to it, it still holds. We go up again for quite some time, and then we come back to it, it still technically holds, right? A bearish one would not do that. We would take liquidity almost every single time with a bearish one. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I know it could be a little confusing. I don't want to confuse people. You should still take a bearish OB if you see it, but it's going to be higher probability if it's attached to an inverse or a fair value gap. And you can get away with taking it on the first run down, but on the second run to the OB, or the bearish OB, it's probably going to end up failing. So really quick, I do want to say, the candle that confirms the order block, like, how I said that you want to see an engulfing candle. In this case, we took out this low. You'd be looking for a bullish order block. How would you know it's a bullish order block? The candle that gives you the OB will be undeniable. So for example, say if you're the type of trader that doesn't like the singular candle and you're looking for a group of candles, for example, if you're a singular candle order block trader, you'd be looking for just this candle. But if you're using two, you would group together both of these candles, right? The candle that gives us the OB will be a strong bullish candle. This one right here does give us the OB, which means technically this is a real OB, right? And then we get a real candle that validates it even more for their higher time frame. This would be a higher time frame OB, right? It's going to be undeniable is what I'm trying to say. The candle that gives you the order block confirmation, like of it being an order block, will be undeniable for it to be an order block, right? If I go back here and you're thinking, we took out a high, so where's our bearish OB at, right? For it to be a bearish OB, we need to close through this, right? Someone out there is arguing that the bearish OB is up here. It's, somewhere in here, right? There's a lot of arguments that can be made. It's going to be undeniable once we get the true order block, because it's going to be a one singular candle or a set of candles that just run straight through it all, and it's going to be undeniable. Every single person across the board will be able to say this is a bearish OB, because it's going to be so obvious that we just run straight through it. And me personally, this candle right here is the one that does it, which is exactly why we come back to this point right here, and then we get another bearish OB, which is respected once again, right? You can see bearish OB, another bearish OB is formed after we get this singular close through it. Propulsion block, we take liquidity, fair value gap, all that good stuff. It's going to be extremely obvious once we get the candle to confirm the OB. I call it the activation candle or confirmation candle, but that's just me. So once again, it's going to be extremely obvious, the candle that confirms the order block. So when you have order blocks like this, And if you can spot them in time, you can use them to your advantage, because even if you don't trust the OB, like say you don't trust this, well, now you know that you can expect a fair value gap or an inverse or liquidity to be taken after an OB is formed. In this case, we get the bearish OB. We dump again to confirm the order block. We tap into it, create a propulsion block, and then guess what? We take liquidity. In that process of us taking liquidity, what do? We make a bearish SIBI, which is how you can trust this propulsion block and the original order block to then seek more liquidity below. And so once again, this is just the intro to order blocks. This is just how you can try to spot them. You can just trust them more because you know now that they either get an inverse, they take liquidity, or they create a fair value gap. Those three things always happen with order blocks, always. That's how you can trust an order block.